Hey everyone, it's Bill here again, and this is the second tutorial in a three-part series in which we're learning how to take a fairly straightforward 16-bar lead sheet, that's melody and chords, and turn it into progressively more interesting and more complex performances on the piano. If you haven't seen the first tutorial in the series, you'll find a link to the series playlist in the description text right underneath this video on the YouTube watch page. And just below that, you'll also find a link to a PDF on Google Drive. And in that PDF, you'll find the original lead sheet, the melody and chords that we're working on, plus, if you're a more confident music reader, a transcription of the playthrough that we're going to hear in a second. So do be sure to give that PDF a download, as you'll find it really useful. Now, if you've seen that first tutorial, you'll recall that what we were doing was taking our melody and chords and interpreting them in a fairly simple way on the piano keyboard, with block chords in the left hand and the melody line in the right hand, a little bit like this. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to make things a little bit more interesting. Let me just play through the kind of thing that I mean. Like in the previous tutorial, I'll include the lead sheet on screen as I play. Now watch carefully, because it's only 16 bars long yet, and I'm going to pack in quite a lot of different techniques. Here we go. Okay, so in terms of practicalities, in terms of what you actually have to do on the piano keyboard, what are the differences between what I played just then and what I played back in the first tutorial, where we had our really simple left hand block chords and right hand melody? Really, there are two big differences, and the first one is the way we were using time. Now, if you think back to that first tutorial, you'll probably recall that our playthrough was in quite strict time, okay? And so on and so forth. There was a steady 4 beats to the bar. What I was doing just a minute or two ago was completely different. I was playing much more freely and expressively. I was using rubato, if you know that expression, stretching the time, speeding up and slowing down. Pausing, things like that, using the time as a form of expression in itself. Now, that is something that's actually quite difficult to teach. You have to try it for yourself after you've got the basic chords and the basic flow of the piece under your fingers, yeah? So kind of mentally park that for now. That's something I want you to play around with when you're practicing, but always be aware of it. Always be aware that in this particular style, we are being much more expressive, much more free with our timing. The other big difference, I would say, between what I've just played and what we did in the first tutorial lies in the balance between the two hands. So in that first tutorial, we had quite a lot going on in the left. We were playing these block chords, while the right hand was playing just single notes. Yeah, it was pretty simple, it was very manageable, and most of the important decisions we had to make were about what was happening in the left, you know, which chord inversions we would use and things like that. This time, the situation is almost completely reversed. We have more notes being played in the right hand, we had chords in the right hand, and very often the left was just playing single notes. So just have a listen again to the first couple of bars. Okay, so as you can see, especially if you look at bar 2, I've got chords in the right here and just single notes in the left. Now don't get me wrong, if we're playing chords in the left and single notes in the right, that's a perfectly legitimate way of playing the piano, no problem at all. But do you remember me in the first tutorial making the point that the further down the keyboard we go, the more audible overtones each note has, and therefore the muddier things can sound if you play lots of notes close together. The practical consequence of all those audible overtones on low notes is that you tend to get a good, clear, well-balanced sound out of the piano if you bunch notes closer together the further up the keyboard you go. Yeah, so they can support and reinforce one another, and spread them further apart the further down the keyboard you go. Yeah. Now, can you see how very roughly what I played today followed that principle? Yeah, a lot of the time it was thicker right, thinner left. You don't need to be slavish about that approach, and the chords in the left, tune in the right approach works just fine, and in practice you'll probably use both, you'll mix and match them. But it's always worth bearing in mind that if you have notes more widely spaced in the bass and more tightly spaced in the right and in the treble, then you're working with the piano's harmonics rather than against them. Having said all that, I was using some variation in the left hand, because just playing a single note bass line all the way through would have got a bit boring after a while, okay? And in particular, I changed things around a bit in the middle section, the B of our AABA, if you remember that terminology from the first tutorial, the bit that you'll find between bars 9 and 12 of the lead sheet. Now in those 4 bars, I put in quite a few different left hand techniques. Mixing and matching stuff to create variety like that, by the way, is something that professional piano composers and improvisers really do a lot, especially when we're working in this kind of free and easy style. So let's just have a look at bar 9, measure 9. Okay, I'm using broken chords in the left hand there, arpeggios if you want to use that terminology. Okay, so in other words, I'm taking a basic chord and I'm playing up its notes from bottom to top. Okay, just look at how I'm voicing those chords there. Okay, I've got an A flat chord that I want to play. I could have voiced it like that and played my notes up like that, but instead I spaced out. I went A flat, E flat, A flat, C. Why am I doing that? It's because I'm aware that the pedal is down. Okay, I'm using pedal pretty heavily throughout the whole of this piece, actually, mostly pedaling with the chord changes, sometimes pulling back a little bit, sometimes pedaling for longer. We'll talk more about pedal in the next tutorial, but I'm aware it's down here, so when I'm playing my arpeggios, in effect, these notes are sounding together, not quite as strongly as if I played them all together as a single chord, but they're still sounding together. So because we're down here on the keyboard, I want to think about spacing them out. If I played them like that, it would have been a little bit too thick. I want to give those rich overtones space to breathe, so I'm using an arpeggio that's reasonably well spaced out. And when you do construct an arpeggio, if you're going from low to high, start spaced out at the bottom and move closer together at the top, okay, assuming you're going up the piano keyboard. A couple of things I want you to notice: I'm not using broken chords exclusively. I'm chopping and changing them with brief block chords. So for example, if you look at bar 10, I played something like this. Do you see that C minor 7 chord that I dropped in there? Okay, a block chord just like in our first tutorial. I'm keeping it fairly high. I wouldn't play that down there, too low, too chunky, but I know I'm okay because I'm here. When I come to a lower block chord, at the start of bar 10, I played this on the A flat chord. Okay, I wouldn't want to play a full block chord that far down, so instead I used a shell chord, the root and the 7th note of the chord, enough to give a flavour of the harmony that I'm after, which is A flat major 7, but not so much that it's beginning to sound chunky. Another quick thing to notice there is that I'm making life a little bit easier for myself by only running the broken chords up the piano keyboard rather than up and down. It is good, it is useful to be able to play broken chords both up and down the keyboard, but when you're improvising in particular, playing up is easier, and it's also likely to give you a more stable sound because it tends to establish a clear bass note right at the start, okay? Just something to bear in mind there. Okay, back in the first tutorial in the series, I said I'd talk just a little bit about the implications of the key change we have in our B section. It doesn't last very long, but it's quite dramatic, yeah? It's just really bars 9, 10 and the first half of 11 before we go back to the original key. But it's really striking, and that's because in bars 1 to 8, we're solidly in the key of C major. Almost all the chords we come across up till the end of bar 8 are what we would call diatonic to the key of C major. In other words, we can grow them out of the C major scale using nothing but the notes of that scale. The one exception is the B flat chord, yeah, that crops up in bars 4 and 8. But then in bar 9 we hit this A flat chord, quite majestic, yeah. Then we have a B flat 7 chord, and those aren't diatonic to C. Neither is the C minor 7 and the G minor 7 that follow, nor the A flat that follows that. The overall sound has changed, and those chords are functioning as if they were playing the roles they would play in another key. What is that key? It is probably E flat major, or it makes sense to think of it as E flat major. There's the E flat major scale. It could also be C minor, which shares the same flat notes, okay, it's essentially the same. The two are relative to each other, they share the same key signature, 3 flats, and it doesn't really matter whether we think of ourselves as being in E flat or C minor, as long as we think in terms of those 3 flats that crop up in the E flat major scale. What really matters is the practical question. What does the key change mean you have to do? In other words, how is that key change going to affect exactly what you do on the keyboard? Whether you're improvising, whether you're thickening up your right hand, which we're going to talk about in a second, or any of the other techniques that we're using. Basically, in a situation like this, things are fairly simple. There's a definite key change, so we start basing everything we're doing around the scale of the new key, E flat major. So in bars 1 to 8, everything is based around the notes of C major, and then in bars 9, 10 and the first 2 beats of 11, we just base everything around the E flat major scale. And if we're improvising to stay safe, we can just take the notes from that scale. Now the trick, of course, is being able to work out what the new key is, because it's not always obvious. Even if you look at the way I've scored it out, I haven't put in a change of key signature. It's so short it's not really worth putting a key signature change in, so I've done it all with accidentals in the score. So if you get a lead sheet for a song and you come across a change of key, which is very, very common, especially in the middle sections of songs, especially jazz songs, then the first thing you need to do is work out what the new key is and what its scale is, so you know what kind of scale to base your playing, your improvisation around. If you're still in the early stages of learning music theory, that might mean using your ear and a bit of trial and error, but basically it's all a case of just switching from one scale to another. Now let's think about what I was doing in the right hand. I was using 3 basic techniques. First of all, I was building out the melody using chord notes. Secondly, I was, in quite a simple way, using multiple voices in each hand. And thirdly, I was extending, enriching, and even slightly decorating the chords. Let's go through each of those in turn, explaining what they are. So the first thing I'm doing is thickening up my melody line using chord notes, okay? I've always got the melody line on the top, but underneath I'm filling in chord notes every now and then. Let me show you how I did that by just playing the first couple of bars exactly as I played it a few minutes ago, and just in the right hand. Can you hear how I'm using the pedal there? That's because when I just play single notes, I've got lots of fingers free. So making everything smooth is easy, I don't need the pedal. But when I'm playing chords, I'm having to jump much more. And that means to smooth things together, I need to use the pedal. Now, like I said, I'm not filling in notes, chord notes under every melody note. I could do that if I wanted to. especially if I wanted my melody to be really pronounced and emphatic, I could do that, but generally it sounds too chunky. I'm having to lift my hand and put it down again an awful lot, and that's kind of working against the kind of smooth, mellow sound that I want here. So I'm being quite selective. Generally, I'm filling out the chord if there's a particular sound I want. Yeah, so on that kind of C major 7 sound in the first bar, I think that's quite interesting. So I stress it a little bit just by filling out the chord before we get up to the full C chord up there. Yeah. I'm also thinking about where the rhythmic stresses fall within the bar. Yeah. So if you listen to bar 2, you'll hear that I've got a full chord on the first half of beat 1. Okay. 1, and then on the first half of beat 2, 2, and then on beat 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, but then I've got nothing on beat 4 because I'm holding that, and then the little note at the end, a pickup note for the start of the next phrase, it's unstressed, so I just hit that as a single note. Let me count that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and into the next bar. That means that the stress is also tending to land on notes that come from the underlying chords, because stress notes are more likely than not, or more likely than other notes, than unstressed notes, to be chord notes. And it means that I'm not having to fill in chords underneath passing notes which might not belong to the chord. D minor 7, then the G is a passing note, so I don't really want the chord under it because that creates a very distinctive sound, and then fill in again there. Okay, so it's been influenced by the stresses and where there are chord notes in the melody. Okay, the second right hand technique I was using is that I was sometimes playing multiple voices in my right hand. I did it a bit in the left as well, but it was most noticeable in my right. Now, in a music theory sense, the word voice, yes, it can mean someone singing, but it's also used in a technical way to refer to an independent line of music within a total musical texture. Okay, you come across it loads in classical music. Let me give you a concrete example. Just have a look at bars 3 and 4 in the right hand. Let me just play them through. Did you notice how I was holding down some notes while playing others? Those are my two voices, so I'm holding down the lower voice and playing the upper one. Okay, just two of them. Strictly speaking, on the first beat of the of bar 3, there are 3 voices because that F is sustained, but we'll pretend it's not there for now. We'll keep things simple. So my lower voice was something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, just in bar 3, and the upper voice was something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and if I put them together, okay, now in practical terms, usually all it means doing is, it's as if you were playing chord notes under all the melody notes. Okay, but instead of doing that, which would sound kind of, too chunky and bitty, you're just holding the lower notes of the chord. Okay. By the way, if you're looking at the transcription in the PDF file, it's really easy to see the two voices because the lower voice stems are pointing down and the upper voice stems are pointing upwards. The third technique I was using was chord extension. If you look at those two scores in the PDF, the basic lead sheet and then the transcription of what I was playing a few minutes ago, if you just look at the chords over the top of the staff in each case, you'll see that I've slightly changed the chords, or some of the chords, in the transcription. Yeah, none of the basic underlying chords have been changed at all. A minor chord is still A minor chord, C chord is still C chords, and so on. But what I have done in a few places is add notes to those basic chords using this process technically known as an extension. So all extension does is keep the basic function of a chord. It continues to be the same basic harmony, doing the same basic job in the progression, while slightly developing or enriching its sound. Now, chord extension is something I've talked about quite a lot on my YouTube channel in the past, so I'm not going to go into it in great detail here. This tutorial is already pretty information dense, yeah? So if it's new to you, what I'll do is put a couple of links in the description text underneath to tutorials which go into chord extension in more detail. What I'll just do for now is give you an example of how the chord extension is working here. If you look at bar 11, okay, it's the one that I played like this. Okay, resolving to that G7, just coming out the key change there. You'll see that in the transcription I played an A minor 11 chord, whereas in the lead sheet it indicates an A minor 7. Not much of a change, but it's quite subtle. So here's the right hand with the A minor 7 chord, and here it is with the A minor 11. Can you hear that slightly edgier? It's almost a kind of more natural lead in, a slightly stronger lead into the G7 that brings us out of the key change there. Okay. Another good example of chord extension is what I did with those non-diatonic B-flat chords in bars 4, 8 and 16. When I was playing through a few minutes ago, every time I came across a basic B-flat in that position, I turned it into B-flat add 9. Now, if you know a little bit about chords, you'll know that an add 9 chord is different from a regular 9 chord. So there's B flat major 9, there's B flat 9, and in each case we've got some sort of A. So there is B flat major 9 with the A natural, B flat 9 with the A flat. B flat add 9 doesn't have any A in it at all, flat or otherwise. All it does is take the 9th and drop it into the chord, usually next to the 3rd or the tonic of the chord, like that. Okay, again, just listen to the regular B flat chord, and now B flat add 9. Can you hear the difference? Add 9 chords are really rich and warm sounding. They add a little bit of character. Yeah, I think I dropped an add 9 chord into bar, in bar 17 as well. If you're eagle-eyed, you might have noticed that I added an extra bar. Yeah, I kind of came up a C chord and I put a little bit of a coda on there, a kind of mini coda, an ending to round things off. Again, that's a very common technique that professional improvisers and arrangers use. So I played that final arpeggio, whatever it was, and I landed on the C add 9 there. Okay, lovely kind of chord to finish on. And just to make things a little bit more richer still, I'm putting this little twiddle on the F sharp in the right. So I think I held the chord underneath, and then you get that kind of ethereal, otherworldly kind of finish. That F sharp borrowed from C Lydian mode, if you know a bit about modes. Again, it's a common trick to the point of being a cliche if you think about movie scores in particular, but it's just another interesting thing to try out when you're playing around with chords. There's just one final technique that I want to mention, and I promise it's the final one because I realise we've jammed an awful lot into this tutorial, but it's worth sticking around for. It's called pedal point. Now, pedal point has got nothing to do with whether or not you're using your piano's pedals, although confusingly I did use the sustain pedal throughout my pedal point section. What it's actually to do with is the bass note you're playing, and I did it in bars 13, 14 and the first 2 beats of bar 15, just after we'd come out of the key change middle section, just as the original melody was restating itself. Here's exactly what I played. Okay, so can you see that all I was doing was just sticking on that C below middle C as the bass note, irrespective of what chord I was playing over the top, even if the chords I played over the top didn't have C's in them. Okay, let me just play the outline chords that we ended up with. We ended up with C, D minor 7 over C, G7 over C, C major 7 and F over C. Okay, can you hear how that creates a really kind of, it's difficult to find the words to describe it, but it's kind of, it could be edgy, it could be triumphant, it could be euphoric, it could be all kinds of things. Pedal point makes for a very distinctive sound. Now, pedal point usually only works with the tonic or the 5th degree of the scale you're in. Okay, so you could just about have made that work on the G, the 5th. before breaking out as I did onto the E minor 7. Kind of okay. I think it works better on that C, on the tonic there. Pedal point is really good fun, and obviously it's quite easy. It's one of those things that you have to, where you actually do less to create more of an effect. It's a really startling, really cool effect, but try not to overdo it, okay? Have a go at pedal point for yourself and just see what you can do. Listen, as always, see what sounds you can create. Okay, so there we go. I need a long lie down and a cup of tea because that was pretty exhausting. But I wanted to pack a lot into this tutorial because I wanted to show you all the major skills that you need for transforming that basic lead sheet into a kind of quite sophisticated piano performance. Yeah, I wanted you to see it kind of in the round. The question is, in practical terms, what do you do now? Well, I'll repeat what I said at the end of the first tutorial in the series. By all means, copy what I was doing, but it's more important to move on from that. Go back to the lead sheet, go back to the melody and chords, and use the techniques that I've been talking about to come up with your own version, your own adaptation of the tune. And as always, focus less on whether what you're doing is right or wrong in technical music theory terms, and much more on how it sounds. Yeah, play around, listen to yourself. The most important thing is to get a result that sounds good, that is musical. Okay, so there we go. That's the end of the second tutorial in this 3-part series. If you're watching this one just after it's come out, then the third tutorial should be out in about a month, so kind of end of August, early September 2019. Remember that in the description text underneath this video is a playlist that will ultimately contain all 3 of the tutorials in the series, so you can watch them in order. There we go. As I always say, please do check out my books, especially How to Really Play the Piano, the Stuff Your Teacher Never Taught You, which you'll find useful if you're just learning about chords and harmony and improvisation. An Introduction to Cocktail Piano you'll find useful if you want to learn about chord extension and chord enrichment, which I've been talking about today. There we go. Also, please check out my Patreon crowdfunding campaign, patreon.com/Bill Hilton, and remember to follow me on social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram links are all in the description text below. If you have comments, questions, anything you want to say to me, stick those in the comment thread underneath this video, and I'll see you in part 3. Happy piano playing.